So I'm getting ready to do my daily blog here. I'm going to be blogging on a topic that I've been thinking about, and it has to do a little bit with kind of the signs of the world and what's going on around the world. It's November 2014. We have some riots and protesting going on in the U.S. Obama's making decisions that, he shouldn't be making on his own. There's ISIS, there's all kinds of crazy weather going around the world that's been going on for a little bit. And the signs line up with God's word that it's basically lining up for the end of the world, the end of times. And a long time ago, people thought, it's the end of the world, but there were still a lot of things that hadn't lined up with God's word yet. There were a few things, obviously, that were in God's word that were happening, but now it's like you can look around and you can see, okay, this is too obvious that things are lining up with God's word and the prophecies in God's word. So, different things like the chip that people are going to eventually put in their arms or hands or whatnot to give them identity, and Ebola, and just all these different things going on. It's pretty crazy. So I think about my children, and I think about, the scare of thinking, what if my kids had to choose between living and dying for Christ, Christianity? What if it came down to it, to where somebody approached them or our family and said, we aren't accepting Christianity, and either you choose life or you choose death. And that's scary as a mom. As an individual myself, I think that, that would be an easy choice. But for my kids, it's a really hard thing to think about as a mother, the choices that we would have to make for our own kids. So I was really just pondering upon it in my heart last night, and I thought, God, we think it's easy as a Christian to say, yeah, I would choose Christ. Hands down, that would be my decision. I would die for Christ. But what about persecution? What about, it's not just a 5-second, you're gone, boom, you're dead kind of thing, no pain. No, what about persecution? What about if somebody's telling you they're going to persecute you? And if you really think about the harsh thought of that, it's scary. It's very scary to think about, oh my gosh, what if somebody did tell me, choose, or I'm going to do this to you, or whatever. And so I started praying about it, and I was like, God, this is really a hard thing to think about. And he showed me very clearly that there's not a whole lot in the Bible that talks about Jesus when he walked the earth. I mean, if you think about the whole Bible, there's not a whole lot in the Bible about Jesus' life. There's a few things in the Bible that give us enough to live on, which is just like Jesus. It's just like God to do that, just give us enough that we need. And so one of the things that Jesus obviously gives us is his journey to the cross and the persecution that he had to deal with. It was not easy for Jesus. It was hard for him. He, sweat and cried and had real legitimate human fear, knowing that he was getting ready to be persecuted. It was real. And to think about what he went through, I can't imagine me myself continually going through that torture for hours and days. I cannot imagine staying strong and staying firm in my faith, being whipped and whipped and whipped and brutally beaten. I can't imagine. So I was like, how did Jesus do this? And people think, because he was God's son, because he was Jesus. That's how he did it. Jesus was human. And the way that he conquered all of this, and he made it to the cross without denying God, was by weeping and spending time in the presence of God. Even Jesus himself, the Son of God, coming down from heaven, had to spend one-on-one time with God in order to find his strength. So that's for us today. Find your strength in God. It's not enough to just be a Christian. It's not enough just to read your word. In order to stay strong in these end times, even just in a daily walk with God, where there is no persecution possibly right now in your life, we have to get that time with God on our knees. Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Jesus sweat. He spent hours in the presence of God as the Son of God himself. He still knew the importance of that, and he still needed that when he was here on earth as a human. Like I said, there's only so much that Jesus left us in the Bible to reflect on his walk and his life as a human here on earth. And one of the things that he did show us is that he did spend quality time with the Father, weeping and crying and praying on his face alone with nobody else. And so we cannot even begin to think that we are any bigger than Jesus himself, to think that we do not need that time with God. How is it possible for us to think that we would stand firm in a time of persecution for being a Christian like Jesus had to deal with? Mark my words, there are people right now dealing with this type of persecution, and it could be you one day, it could be me one day, it could be our kids one day. And the only way that we will stand firm is by knowing our Father, knowing who our God is. And the only way to do that is to spend time on our faces before his throne every day. If you have to cry, if you have to weep, if you have to sweat, if you have to pray out loud before God, on your face, on your knees, this is what has to happen as Christians today. We are living in a time where it's becoming a necessity. It should have been a necessity our whole walk with God. And, I'm hoping that a lot of us, that has been something that we've been doing. But I encourage you today that this is something that has to be done, because we are living in a time and our kids need to see us rise up to this calling as a Christian. Set an example for your family, your generation. Be that one person that when you go to heaven, that's my God, that's my Father. And you go running up to him and he says, job well done. You did a good job. You learned to love me, you learned to love others. You spent that time with me. And during that time, I taught you. And I gave you the strength that you needed. Have a blessed day. Be encouraged. And I'll talk to you soon.